So coming off the really excellent engineering presentation, I took a completely different approach. So what I'm doing here is leveraging experience from my MSW and my kind of completed PhD in English and pedagogy. And what I have for you are 4 tips on how to take some of the best lessons that come out of care work and current pedagogy and leverage them in ways that you can incorporate into a pandemic-friendly schedule. And what I mean by that is that I'm not recommending things that take you like 6 months to prepare and implement. I'm trying to give you things you can do in under 20 minutes that have a big impact on your students' mental health, their communication, or their general well-being. So this is a bit of a signposting slide. There's 4 goals that I'm going to try to achieve with you. There's 4 goals I'd like you to try to achieve with me, right? So I want to create space for different ways of knowing. All that really means is that you go beyond the conventional, can you repeat X or Y back to me? And that starts to tap into their experiences, their lived experience practicing, their co-op knowledge, all these different myriad forms of knowledge that in the academy, we maybe don't always expect or make space for. I'm trying to impart genuine, compassionate activism. And I've summed that up as if you've asked them to trade their mental health for your course credit, you've asked for too much. I don't think any course credit is worth that. I want to consider the ethics of recontextualizing how you make meaning. So similar to the ways of knowing, the ways you're making meaning is not you getting up in the front of the room and imparting everything you ever learned from your undergrad. That is not a meaningful experience. You have to take that knowledge translation or that knowledge mobilization and leverage it in a way that creates more memorable dialogue, right? And the last thing I want to do for you is give you some visual examples of interventions that you can use during the pandemic. And all of my examples are from my own context of English courses, but it could be easily adapted for courses in other majors and programs, hopefully. And if you're not sure how to adapt it, email me because I do that work regularly and I am happy to help you with that. So here we go. I call it, can you see that? Yes, the reasonably simple interventions strategy. I'm going to hit you with 4 of them. You can use 1 of them. You can use 3 of them. You can use none of them if you hated all of them. I'm hoping to challenge you to use at least 1. So here we go. First one, weekly callouts. You do not have to read everything I wrote in the email. It's just a visual. So I focused here on showing rather than telling, which is something that I tell a lot of my first and second year students in English programs. You may remember that from your own English education. It's important to demonstrate your knowledge visually and with signposting, maybe graduates would say, instead of just verbally or contextually. So how I have the email organized, how I've got it laid out in sections, how I have a standard greeting at the top. You can think of it, especially in pandemic times, almost like that's your lecture portion, if any of you have been lucky enough to have whole classes to yourself. So this helps get around some of the navigational difficulties that a lot of the first year students are having with online learning. So if they're using MLS, if they're using Quest, if they're using, what's that weird one that the CS students use? I don't remember. I couldn't even figure it out, and I've been here for years. So you want to be addressing those navigational difficulties right in your correspondence with them, because they're going to try for a couple minutes to open your assignment, and if they can't do it, they're not going to do it, and they're not going to feel bad about it. So you can challenge that by being open and available with those kind of difficulties early on and addressing it before it becomes an issue, right? Which seems, obvious, but it doesn't always happen. If you're challenging the paradigm of instructor to student, so we in North America kind of see that on a hierarchy where I am the keeper of all knowledge and anything you want to know about English and rhetoric comes through me. You know nothing. Chances are they don't actually know nothing. They might actually surprise you with what they know. So you want to encourage them seeing you as a more approachable person than the sage from on high, right? So if you introduce that experience as I am just as much here to learn from your experiences as you're here to learn, what I have to give you, that kind of leveling the playing field can be productive to get your students more involved in the conversation. I hope that makes sense. This is another example. You see that everything is headlined. So if they're coming back to see the email, I do this on a weekly basis. Every Monday or whatever, I'll send it out, and that's their week in review for my course. And now they don't have to check my syllabus over and over again because I've written it right there as a reference for Thursday night when they might be feeling anxious about my course. So then the headings, they can skip to what they're feeling anxious about, right? So you're kind of preempting that email on Friday night saying, can you explain what we're doing next week again? By saying, look, here it is right here, right? A lot of this is preemptory work. So I do sections like housekeeping, which is just general classroom rules or assignment feedback stuff. I do this week in review, anything I'm going to be grading them on or anything I expect them to be working on is in that section. Coming up or next week for your keener students who are a little bit ahead or people who just like to have the roadmap. I'm one of those people who likes to know what's coming up, even if I can't do it at the moment. And then non-course related, I've found this helpful in the past. You may or may not. I'll include the non-course related content, especially when the midterms or exam season comes around, and I'll put stuff like self-care memes or videos that I found interesting or TED Talks, anything that isn't directly course adjacent, but might give them a bit of a screen break from the knowledge mobilization, right? So this is just another example of a weekly call out, and I'm saying here that rhetorical choices make a difference. So you want to try to establish a personality beyond I am your TA for this term, because that's not very engaging, right? You don't want to sell them the course like they want to teach it next term. You don't need to do that, but you do want to kind of imbricate some kind of personality beyond the specter of UW in general. So I lean into my own personality as kind of quirky and self-deprecating. I do that a lot in my emails, mostly because I can't help it. And I also use a lot of color as a means to just give visual interest, but also for them to hone in on the stuff I'm really wanting them to pick up on, right? So in the last part here, you don't want to be too hard with them. That just goes into rhetoric again. And you want to, as much as possible, anticipate the questions you're going to be getting in the chat forums, because then you're avoiding 6 or 7 questions that you'll be answering later that week. So it seems like a lot of work to put these together up front, but that top loading work, I take 30 minutes on a Monday to essentially answer all my emails for the week. Only 1 or 2 students have questions after this. So I've saved a lot of time. The second one, how am I doing for time? Okay, coffee chats instead of office hours. And I've done this because if you call it coffee chats, they will actually come talk to you. And I could probably, if I spent a ton of time researching it, come up with reasons why that rhetorical choice matters. But I think it's just the openness and the availability to talk about something besides the assignment. And I've found that the students really respond to this. So I've used MS Teams for it. I've used Discord for it. That's a really good one, very robust text editor, and it's got a lot of accessibility support for students who need those accessibility concerns. I recommend Discord. But if you're stuck with MS Teams, you can do the coffee chats in the main video function. It functions just like office hours, but they can come talk to me, talk to each other, whatever. Third one, I do a check-in. If I have less than 50 students individually at week 7 and 11, sometimes I'll do it in week 3. So the full class check-in is just, here's how I think it's going. Tell me how it's going from your end. Because as much as I think I'm a genius and try to anticipate everything, I'm not a genius and I can't anticipate everything. So it's really helpful to me when the students tell me what's working for them or which chapters were confusing for a lot of people, because I can go back and clarify that. And then they're more invested in my class because they don't feel so far behind they're going to give up. And I don't want them to get to the point that we've all been at in one course or another, where you haven't gotten concepts week after week after week, and then you don't want to do it anymore. I do whatever I can to prevent that. And those mass check-ins at 3, 7, and 11, really helpful for getting some of the students that are falling off track to get back on the train, right? Up here where it says important check-in, these I send to students who have like quote unquote disappeared, which has become more prominent during the pandemic. So I'll send kind of a form email of, I'd really like you to talk to me about why X or Y hasn't been submitted. And I find if I catch it early, they're A, more willing to talk to me about it because something minor happened. And B, if you get ahead of it before they haven't submitted 3, 4, 5 assignments, by that point, they've given up on your course. So they're either going to take the fail or they're going to unenroll. And if you'd like to prevent that, you can catch it early and give a really reciprocal signal like, hey, I'm not here to punish you for not handing in this test. I'd really just like to talk about what happened and if we can work something out together. And I've found that the retention rate from just having those small actions and like signaling that you actually care if they're there or not, it makes a big difference, right? So this is another example. If they've full on disappeared, I'll do a wellness check. I advocate that that's very important. I realize that that's not always possible if you have a 200 student class, but hopefully at that point you have TAs stepping in to help you. I do the response required emails when I'm concerned that they're in jeopardy of failing the credit. And I'll do it as articulately and learning style and person focused as I can. This is the example here, but it can be easily modified to most contexts. It's the same idea as the long form check-in, where you're not saying it as a punishment, you're coming to them as a non-judgmental party saying, hey, I'm kind of worried about you. I'm hoping there's nothing wrong, and I would love to be able to talk about it with you. And most times, I've tried this in 4 or 5 classes, and I think I've only had 2 students out of 20 or so not respond to that at all. So I think having someone there in a power role that reaches out and says, hey, I do care about you and your progress, that's usually enough to get the student talking, and that's what you want to be doing. The last tip, because I'm an English major, you want to be watching your lexical choices, and that's a fancy way of saying the words that you say. So I already spoke about leaning into your personality and not trying to act like the Poindexter at the front of the room. They'll see right through it, and then you're creating a bind for yourself if you get caught in a question you can't answer because you've fostered this appearance of you are an undeniable knowledge source. So if you're a little more open and engaged with a back and forth conversation, and especially admit to knowing when you don't have the answer right away, the students will trust you with tougher questions down the line because they know you're giving them an authentic answer, right? And you do have the means to go out and get that answer and bring it back to them next class, and they'll believe you because you didn't lie about knowing or not knowing it in the first place. Try to explain, this might be hard in some majors, but where you can, try to explain why the knowledge is helpful and how that knowledge could help them in the real world. So from my perspective, I spend a lot of time talking about how rhetoric and writing is useful beyond my classroom because you can be the smartest person in a room at a business meeting, but if nobody understands your idea, nobody will know you're the smartest one in the room, right? So if you want to spend a little time thinking about, how would I mobilize or actualize this knowledge in the real world, you can do that activity with your students, and that'll make them care a little bit more about the content because you've made that direct connection from why I'm making you do chapter 6 and the real world, right? Everything has a purpose. Sometimes you have to point it out to them. And then the other thing I've written here, don't use TAing as an opportunity to just style on students. It's not productive for anybody. Do that at conferences. You want to meet them where they are right now, even if it means modifying the lesson plan a little bit, because once you've got them to buy into your lesson, you can take them a lot further with that buy-in than you can from a site of dual resistance, right? So if you backtrack a bit and pick them up where they're at, you're going to have a result a lot more focused on their learning outcome than if you just tried to get them to bear and grin it through it. Does that make sense? I hope that makes sense because this isn't a very dialectical format. I think I'm out of time. The honesty and the assignment goals, if you're in TAing, you don't have a lot of control over that, but just keeping realism, honesty, authenticity, lexicality in mind, being compassionate, I think you'll be good. I hope that helps you.